Thank you. Okay, welcome everyone to weekly sync number 4 for TCL 63. How was this last week for everyone?
Good.
Yeah, all good? Somewhere in the middle? All right, so let's see what you're up to. Caitlin, take it away with this week's demos.
Yeah, thanks, Devin. So we're going to go ahead and start with demos as usual. Is there a team that would like to volunteer to go first?
Since we are issue number 5, we can start. Is that okay, Corina?
Okay. Love it. Thanks, Raquel.
Yeah, I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. Let me just stick this thing out of my front of me. Okay. So we in issue number 5, we basically, as a user, we wanted to join the existing shopping list. So we can actually share the shopping list with another person, and here's our pull request. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna explain the form, and Corina is gonna explain about the functions, right? So in this case, in the form, we just created a basic form in here. I think what we must struggle with that a little, just a tiny little bit, was about this one here, the clear token input, because we even tried to put it outside the form, and then we tried to kind of like change the submit token input. This on submit, we took it out, and then we put the on click in each one for each one of the functions, but it was not working whatsoever. So we found this type reset, which technically by default already clears the input of the form, but we still kind of added this here. Yeah, and then worked finally. So we have this here. Like, I think it was my test list that we had previously. So if we click, we clear that. And then if we go to join, it's gonna join the list in there. That's basically it for the form. And then Corina introduced me to the ref, which I think she's going to explain better about it. So I'm going to go ahead and let her start explaining.
Okay, hi everyone. Oh, now, Raquel, you're done?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you can leave it onto the form for just another second. Just to add to something to what you were saying, is because we had 2 buttons within the form, and by default they're each submit. So each one was submitting the form. And the type reset, it is for reset. But the reason we also had to add the function to clear the input is because reset is not supported by all browsers perfectly. So we could have added just type button there, and that, we tell React that that's not a submit button, it's just a button there. Yeah, so in terms of we want to make sure that and not just for accessibility reason, but it's also for keyboard users. If you clear the input, maybe you received a message, that you submitted that wasn't working. You're gonna clear the input field, and it's nice if the focus is being brought back to the input as opposed to you having to tab back to the input, or if you're a mouse user, you have to click. So just like an extra step. And I really like useref for accessibility. Basically allows you to kind of create a pointer, a reference, kind of think about it. If you haven't used it before, it's kind of like a stick, and you say, I'm going to use this stick to point at an element. And then here in the input, we say ref equals token input ref. So basically now we're saying, okay, this stick is going to point out to this input. And somewhere else in the code, when we clear when you use the clear function, we're saying, okay, what we want to happen to the input is that the focus being brought back to it once we clear it. So this is a short way to explain how useref are used for accessibility. In terms of other function, Raquel, if you can go to the Firebase file, I think that was the most contentious piece of code for this week, because one of the was a optional assignment was to create a function that allows a user to add the list to the database without necessarily adding an item to it. It wasn't easy to create this function. I think what we eventually end up doing is mimic the behavior of Firestore, because if you manually work in Firestore, you notice that if you create a collection, you can save it right away, like immediately prompts you to add an item. And if you don't, the only option you have is cancel. So the thought was that if that's how it works manually, then maybe that's the only way to make it work also programmatically. So that's why the empty object. And it doesn't have to be an empty object. You could add any sort of like a metadata. Initially, we had something like, this is an empty list, Boolean true. Because for the purpose of us displaying a list of items, we need objects that have the name property. So Raquel, if you can go to the home page. Yeah, so we already had from the previous iteration, we had create new list function, and all we did was update it. So because we used the generate token, that was already given to us, and now the add new list to Firestore is taking that new token and is basically creating a collection with that name in Firestore. And then obviously that empty object is a nuisance. So if we go to the list, we had to add a line of code that's allowing at the top of the list, that's allowing us to filter out that empty object. So we're only keeping the items that have a name property. So that's obviously apart from creating a function, that's the only extra line of code that's there. Yeah, there's other function we created to submit the form, but I think those are more like standard functions. So I was just going to focus on what was unusual about this issue. I hope that's enough.
Yeah, that's a great approach. It's just highlighting the things that might have been difficult for you all or caused questions for the others. Does anyone have any questions for this team? I really like the way you all used the semantic HTML to solve problems with like the button types. I think that's a really good way of doing it because you know, screen readers and assistive technologies will more likely expect that kind of behavior, and there's, you never know what other built-in behaviors might be impacted by that. But then also noting that not all browsers support it yet, so dealing with that use case was a really good approach. So very nice.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm gonna stop sharing.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments before we move on to the other pair? Okay. All right. Let's pass it over to issue number 6. Who's going to share their screen for this?
I'll share.
Okay.
Everyone sees me.
Oh no, Aslan's mic isn't working. Are you able to do your part first, Shangwan? And then maybe Aslan can
Yes, I can walk through
reconnect.
the code first. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks for being flexible.
Yeah. So for this issue, we need to create a filter form to filter the list item that matches with the user input. So we start by creating the form inside the return statement, and then it has a prevent default, just so it prevents the page from reloading. And for the label, we add a HTML4 tag so that when we click on it, it will bring the focus to the input. And then for the input, we have the value matches with a use state. So there's a two-way binding when the user is typing. The onChange function just reflects what the user types and updates the use state. And the ref, we actually stolen it from Karina after seeing her use ref. So we also implement it here. So when we click on this button here, the focus is bring back to the input field. And in terms of the button, it's a typical, but one thing we added is the area label so that it's helpful for the accessibility concerns.
Oh, I think my mic is fixed.
Okay, great. I'm glad you're back. Yeah, I just went through the form part of the code. You can.
Thank you. Yeah, you go on. Thank you.
Oh, you want me to finish first?
Yeah, definitely. Yes.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So in terms of on the top here, we set up the use state for the input. And then we create a handle clear function for the clear button. And the handle input updates the input use state whenever the user types something. And the string matches does two things. First is to sanitize the input. Appreciate Kaylin's advice on using regex to do that. So it filters out any special characters. And for the second part, it compares the user input to the list item. We first convert both to lowercase and then use the includes method to compare both. And finally, we just apply the string match method to the real data to get our filter data. So at the bottom here, so if there are matches, then we will display the filter data in the list format. If I type A here, it will be shortened. But in case when there is no matches, then we will display like no item is found here. But we also added this real data.length greater than 0 and the AND operator just to ensure like in case we have a new list, this line doesn't show up. Otherwise, it will confuse the user. Yeah, so that's a quick walkthrough of the code. I have Aslan walk through the functionality and the feature.
Thanks, Shangguan. So yes, as Shangguan explained, our job was to narrow down the shopping list to the items that the user is searching for. So as the user types in the item in the shopping list, first thing first, I should mention that if we click on the filter items label, it goes to the input field, so it focuses there. And as the user types the item that they are looking for, if the item on the list contains the word that the user is typing, it shows up and the list narrows down to those items that contain the user input. And if the item doesn't exist, then we get a feedback that says no item found. And finally, we have this X button that if the user clicks, it clears the field and then it focuses back on the input field so the user can resume typing and searching again.
Wonderful. Very nice job, both of you. Yeah, and again, I think using correct HTML here is making the experience better. Like when you click on the label, it's directing to the input. Yeah, fantastic. Really nice job and very thoughtful. The way you all are hiding things if it's not gonna, if it's gonna be confusing for the user if it doesn't make sense for that use case. So very well thought through. Does anyone have any questions for this team or comments?
I just want to say that I really love the way they the entire code is nice and clean, but especially when they when the what was the name of the function, string match, and leading up to it. So just so beautiful done. When I saw it, it was just like perfect. Yeah. Just because I took some before I looked at their code, I was going because I need this feature on one of my sites. So I took some time to actually build my own, and theirs is much better. They're just much cleaner, the code. So stole some ideas to use Shenguan, but it's not stealing. I think it's just learning from each other, you know.
Yes, I
So,
did the same for the use background use. So
yeah, that's what I say. You use the word steal, so don't use it again. We're learning from each other. We kind of, it's like kind of like school, you know. You never say that you steal from your student, peer, or your teachers. You know, you learn. So yeah, beautiful, nice job.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I love that we're all learning from each other. I'm learning some things from you all too in these demos. They're really well done demos. And yeah, writing your code very cleanly is just, taking the extra time to write clean code is a gift to your team so that they can review it more easily. It's a gift to your future self so that you can, easily understand what's going on there. So really well done. Okay. Any other questions or comments before we move on to our learning module for the week?
I have one question about the database question. I actually posted on a slide. We discussed it a little bit with Corina about adding a new collection. I was wondering if, because I checked the Firebase data docs today, and because this was really making me wonder, like, because we have lots of records that are empty, because every time we press the generate a new token to add a new shopping list, we are generating an empty record on the database. So right now, the Firebase data store is full of empty records. So that kind of bothered me. I'm like, there should be a workaround around this. So I read the docs, and it says, this is what the Firebase doc says. It says, you do not need to create or delete collections. After you create the first document in a collection, the collection exists. If you delete all of the documents in the collection, it no longer exists. So I'm wondering, could we defer adding a new collection to the time that we add the first item? And somehow we preserve the token, so we can have the token, but we hold on creating a new collection until we add the first item. Because right now, if you go to database, you see there is like lots and lots of empty records, which increases the size of the database, doesn't seem efficient to me.
Can I be the devil's advocate here? Yeah,
please.
Aslan, so it's probably me creating all those empty when testing for accessibility. So if I didn't have that option, then you'll still see all those collections, but maybe with one item in it, because I would still test for accessibility and then do the extra step to add an item. So
Sorry, no, I'm referring to the create new list button. If you press it, it automatically creates a new collection. That's what I meant.
I know. So, but before we also had the option to create a token. Yes, create a token. In that moment, the list would not exist on Firestore, but once you add an item, the list makes it to Firestore. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes. So what I'm saying is that those collections would still be there, just that they would have an item in it. Because there's still a lot of collections there that do have items, because we just tested a lot. And I like, especially when you test for, I don't know, like it takes me like even like 50 times to test a function with all the browsers for accessibility reasons. So I'm just kind of like explaining why there are so many. But again, there's also a lot of them that have just random items, because as we are coding, we are just testing, and we never went back to delete them. So that's kind of, again, so that's just a piece of the Firestore. In terms of functionality, I think the purpose of this optional assignment was that users, once you create the list, let's say there's 2 people in a family, I create the list, I don't have to bother to add anything to it because I could already share it. So
Yes.
that was the purpose of this optional feature.
Exactly. But still, if you press the create new list, it creates an empty collection, right?
Yes.
Yes.
That's the question. Like, if we could prevent that, because generating that collection adds an empty document to that collection. So we end up having to filter that empty document with the real data constant in the list JSX. That's the part that I think if we could defer that to the time when the user adds the first item, then we would not need to add that empty document to the Firestore database.
So
I
I think it
think-
would come down to two things, right? What you'll need to think about is, first of all, do you want to be able to share an empty list? Because if you only generate that token locally, nothing ever gets created on Firebase. And then the second scenario that you could probably consider as well is that I'm not sure if this is a feature yet, but if you do need to implement a feature where you delete items from the list, at some point you're going to end up with an empty list, which means it's not going to exist in Firestore anymore. Like your collection will be lost. So do you want to be able to keep your list even if, at some point you had to delete all items from it? Should that list still exist even after that? So I think those are the two situations you'd probably have to consider.
Yeah, I
think
saw that.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, I saw that Aslan had posted a pretty a thoughtful post on Slack. So maybe that's a good place for us to continue the conversation and decide if we want to go back to that option A, because I know that Karina and Raquel did intentionally implement this like option B, being able to create an empty list. And I think there are definitely arguments in favor of that. But maybe one thing that would also help is that because we have been testing a lot, and especially earlier iterations of the app, we have lots of, to Aslan's point, we have lots of empty lists. Maybe doing a little bit of database cleanup would also help us to just kind of like get a sense of how many like unnecessary lists are getting created. So yeah, I think it's a good question, but maybe we could have some further conversation about it as well on Slack.
I love it that I'm paired with Aslan next week. So that'll be such an interesting.
You'll have lots of time to talk through.
No, looking forward to it. No, I mean, it just like, again, I was playing devil's advocate, and I think Raquel and I have no affinity to that function whatsoever. It was such a great exercise, and I think we know so much more about Firestore than before. Having said that, I think it's probably it's fair that we have this conversation, and also just as David was saying, let's wait to see what happens down the line, because we're gonna have a delete item function, update. It looks like they're already kind of waiting for us to work on them in the future, and then once we have all the information, once we finish the app, we can, again, Caitlin, I'm happy you suggested that because we still have option A there. So we didn't delete that code. It's just commented out. So we have the initial create new list function. So yeah.
These are all really good questions and considerations that you all are bringing up. And like it goes to show there's no like one obvious answer to this kind of thing. You just have to weigh pros and cons. So looking forward to seeing more of that discussion over the next week and beyond. But for now, I'll pass it over to Chase to do our learning module for today.
All right, thank you. All right. Today, we're going to be talking about pair programming. Can you see the slide? Is that looking good?
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. All right. So pair programming, especially if we were to do it in person, it would be two developers sitting together in front of a computer and taking turns writing code with just one keyboard. And there's two kind of main roles in a pair programming session. There's the driver. The driver controls the keyboard and is responsible for writing the code they need in order to complete the task. This person will try to verbalize their thinking process as much as possible as they're coding, and they really think low level about the code. And then there's also the navigator. And the navigator pays close attention to the code while the driver is writing, offering guidance, suggesting alternatives finding answers to upcoming questions and challenges, and acting as a sounding board for the ideas the driver is coming up with. And I think with a bird's eye view of the code, one thing I heard it kind of compared to is if like two people are in the car, one person's quite literally driving the car, really focusing on that. Another person's navigating, viewing, you know, where the car is going in kind of like a bigger or a more bird's eye view. And then so it's best to approach pair programming with a certain mindset or attitude, because pair programming is an exercise of sharing collaboration, and it can be more efficient to go with your pairing partner's idea than argue based on an approach. Like sometimes, you know, when I'm pair programming something with someone, you know, maybe it's a function where I would usually like use a reduce array method, and my partner likes, you know, a map and a filter or something like that. Like I feel like, you know, if those are very samey, it's not, you know, not worth arguing with my partner over. But we like to take a beginner's mind, and where we embrace doubt and possibility. And this isn't about really teaching or mentorship. Everyone's kind of on the same level and working towards the same goal. But it is an opportunity to learn. Drivers are urged to seek agreement before proceeding, and then navigators are urged to ask instead of telling the drivers what to do. And here's kind of how we go about this, especially remotely. And remotely, there are a ton of amazing tools that can make pair programming more collaborative. You've probably used a bunch of them. But yeah, so we're kind of starting from the upper left here, where two developers will hop on a video screen or in screen share on a call. And the driver will share their screen, and they will code while the navigator provides feedback and asks questions. And then the driver, they'll push code to the remote, and the navigator will be able to pull down that code locally. And then what happens is they'll swap roles. So the driver will become the navigator, and the navigator will become the driver, and then start again for the next portion. And yeah, I think a big part of this is y'all have been doing this for, you know, these last few weeks. And we'd love to hear about your experiences pair programming so far.
I've enjoyed all three of my pair programming sessions. I've been both the navigator and the driver. Since when I was pair programming with Corina, she was able to identify like if I missed a semicolon or I missed type something and identify that. And I also learned a lot from those like Raquel and Aspen better way to write the code. So yeah, it's been super beneficial for myself.
What I
Awesome.
like is that it puts you in a position to talk about code, you know, when you are on your own, you might know how to do it, but it's like we know how to do things really well, but we have a hard time explaining why we're doing it in a certain way. And just especially for us, like entry level, just kind of like getting used to that technical language. I think it's because I think we know a lot, but we also need to be able to show that we know a lot. Especially as, you know, we're looking for a job. So I really appreciate I think the experience has been completely different if we are just on our own and kind of like work on an issue and then share with somebody else. So
Yeah, awesome.
I agree with both of them. It has been great. Each one of them, I'm learning a different thing. Like with Corina, I love them learning about accessibility, and I was kind of knowing her to just explain this to me, and it is really fun, and it is really inspiring me in the sense of, like she mentioned, that when we're alone, we don't have someone to talk about thought process, but having someone there is kind of nice because of it, and inspiring me in the sense of I feel even more motivated to work on my projects by myself, because because of that, for some reason, and I just really enjoy. With all of them, I really enjoy so far.
Same, I really enjoyed all my coding sessions, especially when you have someone else, when you have another pair of eyes to look at your code, because I think it happens that we miss something and the other person catches it. Also with Shangguan, because I know she does lots of lead code and she writes the code so clean and efficient, so it's an opportunity to see how the other person approaches the code. And yeah, I think it has been great to learn and also to see how others code, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then finishing up here, there are some resources here that I can share with you all afterwards. Just like learn even more about pair programming. Yeah. Yeah, and then I think we're gonna do issues.
Yep, we sure will. All right, let me get my screen up here. I must say, like, I feel like this group has probably the strongest focus on accessibility with respect to this app that I've seen so far. And it's, you know, it's really nice to see, because I'm also learning a lot. All right, can you all see issue number 7? Yeah. All right,
Yep.
so for this week, issue number 7. As a user, I want to see a welcoming prompt to add my first item if my list is empty to help me get oriented to how the app works. So when a user starts a new list, they need a little guidance on how to get started. So think through what you'd want to see as a user and make some intentional user experience decisions that will guide our users confidently adding their first item. So the acceptance criteria for this one is fairly minimal in terms of the list view. When there are no items to display, should show a prompt, example, a button, for the user to add their first item. Yeah. So the wireframe, I don't think the wireframe shows much on this. But think of it in terms of just creating a nice flow for a user, right? One way I like to think of these things that it should be fairly intuitive to a user without having to give explicit instructions or maybe minimal instructions as to what should my next step be. Yeah. Any questions on this one?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, because with the last 2 issues, you know, we both teams end up working on the list page, and again, because of that, you know, add to Firestore function that brought us here, like, because otherwise Raquel and I had no business to deal with the list page. But we had to make sure that we filter out that empty object. And so, and then there also, when we were working on a PR, you know, there are some conflicts. And I think the idea was to solve them in such a way that we do justice to both teams and we eliminate as little as possible. So each team's work is going to be reflected. But having said that, obviously, if 2 different teams work on the same page, you know, maybe together the code is not the most efficient, meaning, like, you know, if combined, certain things could be combined. And I was wondering if, let's say, given this issue that it seems to focus just on the list component, the team that works here, is any refactoring allowed? And also taking into account that, you know, there's going to be people from both teams that work on whatever the code is there right now, assuming that we also stay within the scope. And this is not just pertaining to this. This is a question I've been meaning to ask. There's a tweet that I saw. Somebody was saying, like, if you work on a PR and you notice some previous code that's not the perfect, whatever, what's the best approach to it? You clean it or you do another PR? So I thought about that since.
So I think it would depend, as usual. So maybe it comes down to what the refactor entails. So I mean, if we're not blatantly trying to rewrite someone's code if it works and does what it should. But maybe if it's something where you think like, okay, we should extract a function out to a separate file because it's something that will be reusable. I think that's good. Creating like a reusable component like you all did with the button. I think that's also a good approach as well. So maybe,
Okay.
in terms of making things more efficient, more reusable, keeping code dry, if it's a refactor along those lines, I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, they're just thinking of an example, like, we filter the empty objects and then there's under code that filter, so what if there's a way we come up with a way to combine that? So in that sense, like not obviously completely changing the code in there. And it would not even be the purpose, assuming that the team that works on this issue that gets everything done. And so in that sense, yeah, that was the idea behind my question.
Yeah, I mean, I think for application-wide behaviors, that's something that you all should discuss as a team. Like Caitlin was saying, regarding the empty object in Firestore, we could discuss that in Slack and come to a decision as to what it should be generally. But for focus things within your issue, I think you should be fine to optimize and make things reusable. I don't see there being much overlap within like the scope of most of issues, but if there is, say something about it or just talk it out.
Okay, thank you so much, Aslan. I think this issue was made for the two of us because he's dealing with the so yeah, I'm voting for this one if you want to.
Let me just get to issue 8
Oh,
and
yes.
we will.
Oh, okay, yeah, there's another one, sorry.
All right, so issue 8. As a user, I want to mark an item on my shopping list as purchased so the app can learn how often I buy different items. And I think you all had asked about this earlier on in terms of would we be making changes to the actual list? So yes. So in summary, users need a UI that allows them to mark the items but not as purchased so that they can track on their list what they do and do not need to buy. So the acceptance criteria. The list item component now renders a checkbox with a semantic label. No issues there. I know you'll have the accessibility stuff down. Checking of the item on the UI also updates the date last purchased and total purchases properties on the corresponding Firestore document. The item is shown as checked for 24 hours after the purchase is made. So that is, we assume that the user does not need to buy that item again for at least a day. And then after 24 hours, the item unchecks itself so that the user can buy it again. The update item function in Firebase has been filled out and sends updates to Firestore when an item is checked or unchecked. So notes, while you'll need to update multiple parts of the Firestore document for this feature, do not worry about date next purchase just yet, because we will address this in a future issue. And you can use Firestore console to test that the feature is working correctly. That is by updating the value of the date last purchase. So you can play with the dates to make sure that the checking behavior works as intended. Okay. So a bit more complex with this one. Questions?
I like this one better. Raquel, what do you say?
I'm okay with whatever you choose.
So I think this week we had Karina and Aslan, Raquel and Shangan. I think we reached consensus here with respect to these issues fairly quickly. Yeah. All right, so I will assign these to Karina. All right, so easy. But wait, there's more. One more thing. All right. So in testing the app, I actually discovered a bug on this page. So this is actually code that's in production right now. And it has to do with the enter token field. I did notice that there was a sanitize input function, and I think that may be where the issue is coming from. So what I tried to do was enter in some of the characters that you all were trying to escape. I think like $sign was one. And what happens is it does add that backslash to escape it. But if I go to type, it keeps adding more and more backslashes over here. Even if I go to backspace, it just adds more backslashes. So I could clear the input. So that's one bug. And then actually, if I hit / it crashes the entire app. So since issue 7 is a bit light, I think we could assign this bug to Karina Aslan to troubleshoot and see what's happening with this one. Yeah. So this is a bit of a bonus round. I write up like a bonus issue for this one. All right. So I think the first question we should ask is what should this input ideally do once we have that, or once we want to enter that code? Like, what is the expected behavior in this case?
So we know that the generate token function, it's gonna give us 3 words and they're just letters, yes?
Yes.
So in this case, do we wanna cleanse out? Not, meaning if you type a question mark, it should, I guess, make it disappear? Because it's a mistake.
It could be, but then could it also be considered as invalid if you enter an incorrect or an invalid token?
Oh, okay. So just want to make sure that it doesn't do that weird behavior with keep adding extra slashes. Okay.
Yeah. So do we need? So my question is, do we need to escape those characters in this case?
So this was my suggestion, Devin, just as like because these teams did a really great job early on.
Yeah.
So just so we were just doing that to prevent like malicious attacks,
Right.
like if someone's entering in like, trying to do something to break the code, one thing we can do is to like escape those characters. I think it
Right.
was working at one point, and then I think probably in trying to optimize the code, like fixing one thing probably broke another.
Yeah, because that function is actually used for adding items as well, right? And it seems to work just fine on that input. So maybe just a matter of figuring out, where that issue might be.
Yeah, totally.
So I'm just trying to come up with like some acceptance criteria that doesn't just say, okay, don't crash the app. So should we say, so should we, I mean, we should still be able to escape those characters to prevent like malicious attacks, right?
Mm-hmm. I think, team, maybe if we describe what the intention is for this function, then we can kind of define what our acceptance criteria is so that we know when this bug has been considered fixed. Does anyone have thoughts about what should be happening when there's user input and what shouldn't be happening? Or well, what should be happening?
So we allow those characters to be typed in, and then there's just an error that the token is invalid. Is that what we?
I was thinking maybe we could have like a include method, include JavaScript method to just check the token. If it includes any of those characters, then we have like a user state that checks the validity of the input. And if the include method finds any of those characters, that user state marks the validity of the input as invalid, and we don't accept the token.
But I think that already is happening because because we check whether there is a matching token and stored in Firestore. So by checking that, we already give feedback whether it's valid or not.
Or Aslan, were you talking about like doing some client-side validation with the input to say if you get one of those special characters, it should notify the user that the input is invalid?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, do we agree on that method?
So if the user, for example, types in a question mark, do we want the user to see some kind of feedback in the browser that you can't enter a question mark here? Is that something we want to include in the AC, or is that something we want to leave to the implementation?
Maybe the input field, like it's like off sometimes when you have a form and you submit and some fields are not valid, the field is like highlighted somehow, the border is red, or like it's in focus. So maybe
Yeah, so like an error.
yeah, so maybe instead of waiting because right now if you type with whatever characters and it doesn't match an existing token, you're going to get a message that it's invalid.
Yeah.
But then by highlighting the input field and maybe make that message appear right away the moment you type one of those characters. So any non-letter character, basically, and not just it could be just a number also, like a digit. If they type a digit, I don't know if that can be implemented, but it would be a nice challenge to think about. So the moment I type yeah.
Yeah, I like where you're going with this. I'm thinking maybe you could stick with just a text message for now, because I guess having like a red box around the input to signify error kind of leans more into like the stylistic stuff, which we'll be dealing with at the last two sprints. So should we just stick to like a text message for the time being to say, okay, this token is invalid at the time of entering?
Okay, yeah, sure. So again, just to confirm, to confirm, so we don't have to wait for the user to press the join button. Like this message should pop up the moment they enter an invalid character, basically.
Yeah, because then it prevents an invalid submission to a database, which reduces the number of calls that you have to make to the database.
Okay.
Caitlin, from the discussion I'd seen on that pull request, were we concerned about casing of the token?
I don't think that was part of that discussion. It could be part of this one if we wanted it to be.
Yeah.
But...
Okay. I was just comparing because I think you had referenced like the other sanitizing input. So should case matter at this point?
put it as an optional, I guess. Same with numbers, you know, yeah, so.
Yeah.
What if we have like we turn everything to lowercase? If we have a to lowercase method that no matter the token, it always be converted into lowercase. So it's like case insensitive.
Yeah, it could work. I mean, the only argument against I might think would be like, if we treat this like a password, but I don't think it's like it should be like a password in terms of how secure it is, because you want it to be shareable. You want to be like a user-friendly, human readable term that you could just like, hey, join my list. These 3 words, not, exclamation mark something. So we should say the token name can be case insensitive.
It makes it easier maybe to be case insensitive. Because if you tell someone my token is car, phone, and something, they could type it capitalized, someone could type it non-capitalized. So then if it's case sensitive, it can cause confusion when we share the shopping token.
Yeah, I think that does feel a bit more user-friendly.
Yes.
All right. Any other acceptance criteria you want to add to this?
So we're saying that an invalid character will trigger a warning. Do we want to say that we're either going to prevent the user from submitting if there is an invalid token, or if they submit, we're going to check that value before sending it to Firebase? So we're just preventing somehow that invalid token from actually being sent to the database. So in implementation, it could either be the first one is it'll trigger a warning and make the submit button unusable, or if we don't do that, then they can submit, but we won't send it to Firestore.
That's a great point, because and makes me think also, because if we have a trim function somewhere, and I think on this page as well, because you could have just like a couple of white spaces. You press enter and then the messages, press join and then the messages, please enter a token. And then we could actually disable the join button unless there's only letters in the input field.
Yeah.
I've never had to do that, but it would be nice.
Sure. So are we saying the third AC would be that the submit button is disabled until is disabled unless there are only letters in the submit field or in the token field?
Yeah, so disable the ones invalid.
Yeah. Until there's a
question.
valid input or something. Go ahead,
Pressing enter would not submit it, right? If it's invalid. Just to make sure.
If we're disabling the button, yeah, pressing enter or clicking the button would not submit an invalid.
It could still be invalid if it's just not the right combination of letters. So that would
Right.
still be, so we're only checking for, I mean, I guess we could even check there's 3 words in there. Aslan, we keep adding, but this is so interesting.
If we could take it too far, we could, I'm just joking. We could disable if someone could use a tool like Insomnia or Postman to just directly post the invalid token to the Firestore database. But that's too far.
Yeah. I mean, I would just so we remember, add it as a as an optional, if we get to it, if we now learn how to do it, just to check there's 3 words. You know, I would be open to that, you know.
Definitely.
Yeah, so what you might have to just decide is how do you define what is an invalid input in this case, and then, you know,
Yeah.
check for it. This might not be the best title for this issue, but so still saying very nice. I get check boxes here. Okay, I remember how to write some markdown. Very good. All right, I think that should be it for the issues. Any questions? Like, I know this one is going to get interesting this week, so like, I think you're going to have some fun with this one. But any questions, queries, concerns?
I have a question. Like, let's say if we submitted a PR and it's merged the main branch, but later we found there's a little bug or like some small fixes that you want to add. Do you directly merge it? Do you directly like commit it to the main branch, or you reopen the closed issue and merge it to the feature branch and then remerge it to the main branch?
And in that case, I think it might be better just to create a new branch, new issue, you know, and submit a new PR for it, because it makes it easy to keep things organized, at least track things.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, so the same way that Devin just created that bug ticket, you know, you can post in Slack, we realized that there's this problem, we just opened up this issue to track it, and we're gonna create a new PR.
Yeah, I think the bigger application gets, the more risky pushing to main becomes, because sometimes you don't know. Fix one thing, break 5 other things. Yeah.
Yeah, generally you don't want to commit to main, like pretty much ever. You just want other people to have a chance to review it and then test it. Yeah. The other thing is, Karina and Aslan, I would encourage you to start with the first issue that you were assigned, issue 7, and then move on to the bug, just like as far as order of operations.
Yeah.
Focus on one at a time.
All right, if there's nothing else, I guess we could wrap up here. It's 8 p.m. Yeah, this was a nice meeting, y'all. Like a lot, I think we discussed so much in like a very short period of time. So, you know, keep it up. Have a great week, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, all.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Right.